All right. Welcome. Today we're going to be reading through 1 Samuel chapter 25, and we're going to cover the story of Nabal. And some people might know the name Nabal actually means fool, and we'll see in this story he is, but he's not the only one. We'll find that out when we get there. It seems unlikely that he was born with that name. His parents would have known what it meant. It seems like probably it was a nickname, but we're not given that. So maybe his given name was Nabal. Either way, we'll start at verse 1 here. 1 Samuel chapter 25. Verse 1 reads, "Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah." So we have this interesting one part of one verse in between these two chapters. We're going to leave that for now. We're going to come back to it here. It won't be in this chapter. We'll come back to Samuel shortly. He's not done yet. He is dead, but he's not done yet. So after that, then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. And the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. So we might know that the sheep shearing ends up being it's a group activity. The whole village would get together when it was sheep shearing time. It would normally accompany a feast or a festival, and people would gather together and do all this. The men, because not necessarily during this specific one, but we do know that during these sheep shearing feasts, there was a lot of prostitution and those types of things. But so he's shearing his sheep in Carmel. And then if we look at our map, we can see where we've been kind of at for the past few chapters. Ziklag, where David has for now, his normal primary camp. But this is happening over here in Carmel, over here in Maon. So that gives us an idea of where this is taking place. Verse 4 reads, "David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, 'Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name.'" What we will find out, and we'll have to take account from some other places, not necessarily only this chapter, but when we put the pieces together, we find out that David and his men were actually out with Nabal's men, Nabal's shepherds, David's mighty men. They were actually all out together, and David's mighty men, obviously they're kind of moving away from Saul, and they're camping here and there. And these shepherds were moving along in the same area, and David and his men provided protection for him. So that's how he knew about this. In verse 6, David tells his men to greet Nabal. It says, "Thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. Shalom, shalom, shalom." He wants nothing but peace and food. Verse 7, "I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." And when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. Then they waited. Assumedly, they have to, whether they spoke directly to Nabal or they spoke to his men, who then passed a message on, and we end up with, you tell him, he tells him, and on it goes. We're not sure, but they had to wait there for the response, whether Nabal had to think about it or whether they had to wait for a messenger to go to him and come back. Verse 10 says, "Nabal answered to David's servants, 'Who's David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters.'" So Nabal definitely knows who David is. He's not literally asking who is David. He's saying, who does he think he is? Who's this guy that comes up and asks me, apparently a very important man, a very wealthy man, who's David that he's going to come ask me for something? Right? Who does he think he is? That's the point of that verse. Verse 11, "Shall I take my bread and my water?" And now notice how Nabal words this. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men whom I do not know where they come? That's another he knows exactly where David's from. He knows he's on the run. Verse 12, so David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. Now remember, if you read through 1 Samuel chapter 24, you'll remember that David and Saul just had a confrontation where David and his men were in a cave, camped, and Saul came in to use it as a restroom. And while he was doing that, David cut off a piece of his robe. And then after Saul left, David showed it to him and said, I could have killed you, but I didn't. May God judge between us because you have repaid me evil with good. David did nothing but good for Saul, and Saul did nothing but evil to David. It was kind of weird, right? And now we're kind of seeing a shadow of that. But David just came from that. He said, you know what? The Lord will be judge between us. He'll handle this. I trust him. But now we're in this situation. And it seems like maybe David's either out of patience or, we all have times where we don't make the decisions that we should make. Maybe not to the degree that this will be, but we'll follow along here. So verse 12 says, David's men came back to him and told him all these things. Verse 13, and David said to his men, now remember, when David showed up, he told his men to go tell Nabal, shalom, shalom, shalom. He wanted nothing but peace to you, your house, everything. But now David said to his men, every man strap on his sword, and every man of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So it didn't take but just a handful of verses for David to wish peace here, there, and everywhere. Now he's everybody grab a sword. Here we go. Because he was insulted by Nabal. So it's obviously not okay to insult people. It's even more not okay to go kill all the men of a town because the leader insulted you. But there is a judgment coming here. So regardless, it's going to go like we always say. We're still on plan A. We're always on plan A. God doesn't do plan B. Verse 14, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields, as long as we went with them. So even Nabal's workers, his servants, they appreciated David and his men. They protected them, and they understand that what Nabal just did is no good. So they go tell Nabal's wife, hey, your guy's, he's acting a little funny. And I got a feeling David's going to act a little funny because of it. So verse 16, they were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man that one cannot speak to him. So we're not told how this man knows it. He might have, David might have told everybody as soon as the message is coming out of that servant's mouth. He might have told everybody, hey, grab a sword. But it seems like he only told that to David's men, and then they went back and told David. So we're really not sure how this young man knows what's going to happen, but he's right. And then he says, can you talk to your husband? Because, it says he's a worthless man. One can't speak to him. It is that. Yeah. So verse 18, what we'll notice about Abigail is just like David was talking about shalom, shalom, shalom. And now he's off of the peace and onto the swords. Abigail, what her defining characteristic is in this chapter is she's always in a hurry. She's not wasting any time. She's not lazy. So verse 18, then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. She's got a whole feast. And she said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. So notice that when she leaves the city, when she leaves, she came down under the cover of a mountain. So when she left, and maybe that was the only way, but when she left, she went around the cover of the mountain, assumedly so that Nabal wouldn't see what's going on. Also notice that while she's on the way, David and his men were heading towards her, and she met him. So verse 21, now David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow, Nabal, has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. Remember, Saul's done that already, and will do it more. And you know, it's not a bad time to point out that the same might apply to us on both sides of this, right? We may have people in our life that treat us very well, and we may repay them evil for good. And if that's the case, we need to get out our mirrors of Scripture and handle that. It's not acceptable. On the other hand, sometimes we might be the one treating somebody very well, and they might repay us evil for good. And what we need to do is take David's attitude from chapter 24, and then his attitude that will happen again in chapter 26, and we can apply that to our lives. Leave that up to the Lord. He'll handle these things. But we don't, in our flesh, we're not to react and repay evil with evil. We're told specifically not to do that. Even if somebody repays us evil for good, we give them back. We give them back good is what we're supposed to do. I know I fail at that. I imagine a lot of people do, but that's not an excuse. We need to do better there. So, verse 22, David talking, he says, God do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all that belong to him. So we see that David's insulted to the point where he wants to pay back evil for evil, and to the extent that he wants to, there are no males left in that town at all. Nabal and every man there. Well, not even man, every male. So that's, they're in a situation there. Verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey, always in a hurry, and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. So why would Abigail say, put the guilt on me and only me? Give me all the guilt. It seems like that she also knows that the plan is to kill all the males, and maybe she can avoid all that if she can take all the blame and then get David to forgive her. Then none of the males die. But what she's done is she's put herself in as intercessor between David and all the males of that village. She's interceding for him. It's a beautiful thing. She's very courageous for doing that. Verse 25, Abigail talking to David, let not my lord regard this worthless fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. So she was the first one that said Nabal is his name, and foolishness is his game. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. She's telling David, if I would have known that you had sent men and asked for these supplies, I would have given them to you. So don't regard what just happened. Instead, take my olive branch and my apologies. Verse 26. Now then, my lord, as the Lord, and actually, I'm going to read this from the LEB version because there are a lot of different lords in this verse. So just to not get lost in or confused in the translation, I'm going to read it without translating the divine name. I do apologize if that offends anybody, but if it does, just, mute for about 10 seconds. We'll move right through here. So verse 26, Abigail speaking to David, she says, now then, my lord, as Yahweh lives and as your soul lives, because Yahweh has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. So how does she know? Well, there's a lot of things in this chapter that we're really not sure how she knows. So a few things that we can pull out are she definitely serves the Lord. So she is aware of him and seems to serve him. She points out that the Lord is the one that restrained David, even though Abigail herself is in the process of it. And we know through providence, that's just how it works, right? Who killed Goliath? Well, David did, through God, through the Lord. So Abigail is restraining David now through the Lord. So she knows that he kept blood guilt from coming on David's hand in this situation. Now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to David be as Nabal. But it doesn't say what that is. We will find out what that is. But does she know ahead of time? No, we're really not sure. So, verse 27. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. So remember all the food. She packed a whole feast on those donkeys. 28, please forgive the trespass of your servant, for Yahweh will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of Yahweh, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. How does she know that the Lord will make David a sure house? Now, we know because we read the part where Samuel anointed him to be the next king. We know that. His brothers were there. His family was there. So they know that. How does this woman in Carmel know that? Saul thinks that, but he's not even sure. But how does she know it? We're not told. But she knows that David's fighting his battles. And then she says at the end of 28, evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. Now, if we know much of anything about David, we know that's not, it doesn't feel entirely accurate, right? David is going to do a lot of bad things, a lot of great things, a lot of bad things. Adultery and murder being at the top of that list, but it goes on from there. But I guess how should we take that? If evil should not be found in him, it's interesting. So the best that I can do with it is we know, the story of David, his failures are probably more well known than his accomplishments, especially in the folks that don't study scripture so much. They all know that David took Bathsheba and he shouldn't have, it seems like. And they might know, hey, he was a great king, but not really anything that he did. Saul, if we take our people that read scripture and we look through Saul, he has some accomplishments. He defeated these guys, he defeated those guys, but he had some bad failures, right? His failure to put the Amalekites under the ban. That's one of the top ones. But we're told specifically in Chronicles, and I don't have the verse handy, but it is in Chronicles that we're told that Saul died, and it gives two reasons why Saul died. He hasn't died yet in where we're at, but it's coming soon. But it's given two reasons of why he died, and it specifically says because he did not do what he was supposed to do against the Amalekites, which was the reason he had the kingdom taken away. So we figure that. But the kingdom was taken away long before he died. But the second reason is given is because he consulted the medium. And we'll cover that when we get to 1 Samuel 26. No, 27 maybe. But so Saul specifically was killed because he disobeyed the Lord in regards to the Amalekites, and he consulted the medium. Well, that's a hard shot against folks that don't have too much of a problem with fortune telling and Ouija boards and stuff like that. Saul died because of it. He was judged out. He was judged out of kingship from disobeying due to the Amalekites. He died from consulting the medium the next day. Now, it was always going to be that way because, again, we're on plan A. But we should take it as a warning. But the whole point of all of that is Saul did a lot of bad things. He did some good things. He did a lot of bad things, but he was judged for disobedience and consulting the medium. David did a lot of bad things. However, Christ is still called the Son of David. All of the prophetic things about that a shoot from Jesse and an offspring of David, and the David has the kingly line. There's all these things about David to this day. Your Jews are going to say that David was the best king they've ever had, unanimously, right? But he had all these failures. But one thing he never failed was he never turned his back on God. Saul did almost immediately. David didn't do that. He failed every single other place, but he did not fail in that. He never turned his back on God. So I take verse 28 here in 1 Samuel 25, verse 28, when it says, evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. It's not saying he'll be sinless, but I believe it's saying it's noticing that he's never going to have the problems that Saul and so many others have as far as turning his back on the Lord. David never does that. He gets in trouble. He makes good decisions. He makes bad decisions, but he always cries out to God. He never leaves him. Verse 29, if men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord, this is still Abigail talking to David, the life of David shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of Yahweh your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. I don't know. Do you think it's an accident that she brings up a sling to David? I don't know. Verse 30. And when Yahweh has done to my Lord David, according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel. So how does she know? How does she know that God has appointed David to be, and it says prince over Israel, it's talking about the king. How does she know that David's been anointed? I'm so curious. My Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. So what we do learn right there is that it would have been without cause if David would have slaughtered those people. It would have been without cause. Even though he felt insulted, it would have been without cause. Even though he might have felt like he had a cause, it would have been without cause. He would have blood guilt. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. So it seems like Abigail saying, once the word of the Lord comes to fruition and you're king over Israel, remember me. Hey, I don't blame her. She knows her husband's worthless. So, why not? Verse 32, and David said to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. So again, David starts off peace, 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 ends up sword, 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 moves on to blessed, blessed, blessed. So he's coming back around to where he should be. And he's giving credit to God for it. Verse 34, surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. And again, we talked about how Abigail was, her thing was, she's not lazy. She's always in a hurry or making haste. David must have noticed that. He said, it's a good thing you did, because if you didn't hurry, they'd already be dead. So it works out well. Verse 35, then David received from her hand what she had brought him. And he said to her, go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice and I have granted your petition. So starts with peace, gets a little sketchy there, comes back, ends with peace. That's how it should be. 36. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. So notice that, in chapter 24, David's acting properly. Chapter 26, he'll act properly again. Here in chapter 25, not so much. David is the anointed king. He's not the current king because Saul still is, but he's the anointed king. He'll be next. He knows that God is going to remove Saul whenever it's time, and then David will be put there. That anointed king, David, acting like a fool in this chapter. And now we have the fool, Nabal, in this verse, acting like a king, holding a feast like the feast of a king, very drunk. So drunk that his wife wouldn't talk to him and tell him what happened until the morning. So what happens in the morning? Verse 37. In the morning when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. Not like he felt bad or his heart sank or he got into depression. Nope, his heart died and he became as a stone. Seems like there's only 3 things that I can think of. Obviously, a heart attack, maybe a stroke. The other thing, maybe some sort of a coma. But he became as a stone for 10 days. Verse 38, about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. So he was judged the next morning. And then he was given 10 days, it seems like, to think about it. And then God struck him dead. Now, I don't presume to think that any time that we mistreat somebody, that God is going to just strike us dead. We'd all be dead. Every person over a very young age would be dead. So, his mercies new every morning, and it's a good thing. But this is more of a sign that, there was a judgment coming on Nabal anyways. And David had the opportunity to carry that out by his own hand and chose not to, with the help of Abigail through the Lord. But Nabal had an appointment and it was going to happen. So David left him alive. God did not. Verse 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult that I received at the hand of Nabal and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife." And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. Now, I don't want to get too far away from verse 39 there, where it says that blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult that I received at the hand of Nabal. What we've already probably figured out from this chapter is David doesn't handle insults very well. I don't either. I imagine most people don't. Not this poorly, but I imagine not well. What we'll find out later in David's life is there's a man that is screaming at insults at him by a city gate, and one of his men wants to kill him. David's coming back in. I believe he's king at that point. There's some coming and going that happens kind of during that time, but I think he's king at that point. Either way, his man that's with him wants to kill this man that's insulting him. And David tells him, and not verbatim, it's been a while since I've read this, but David tells him basically, how would I know, or how am I supposed to know if he's shouting insults at me because God told him to? It could be that the things that he's yelling at me is just part of my judgment because of kind of how poorly I've been acting lately. So David is going to change the way that he handles insults, and we can too. And hopefully it doesn't take all the things that David had to go through up to that point, because none of us are ready for that. But he will change. He'll stop taking his insults so poorly. Verse 43, and this one's going to maybe trigger some ears. Verse 43, David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, who was in Galim. So David currently has 2 or 3 wives, depending on who you ask. If you ask David, he's got 3 wives. If you ask Saul, he's got 2 wives. If you ask Ahinoam or Abigail, they might just say 2 also. So let's just take it one piece at a time. Michal, his first wife, because Saul had promised her older sister to David and then reneged on that promise and given her to somebody else. He finds out that Michal loves David. He figures he can use that to his advantage. They end up getting married. She loves David. She helps him escape from Saul. That's the last time I think that they saw each other up to this point. But it seems like that act of helping David caused Saul to give her to this Palti, the son of Laish. So they did not get divorced. And we'll find out later, David's not excited that she's been given to a different man either. That'll come back up. So why then would he take this second wife, Abigail, and then also a third wife, Ahinoam? Well, let's look at Ahinoam first. We'll notice that she's from Jezreel. This is not Saul's wife, Ahinoam. Same name from a completely different place, because an issue with Saul's wives is going to come up later, and we don't want to be confused about that. This is a different Ahinoam. The best we can gather, or I can gather from this, is again, this multiple marriages to multiple wives. Although the Bible is giving us this historical record and it's describing the things that happened, it's not prescribing these things. It's not telling us to do this. It's telling us what David did. Okay. It also told us how he lied, how he wanted to kill Nabal and all his men. There's a bunch of other things David's going to do that it's going to tell us, but it's not telling us to do. So this does not excuse the having multiple wives. It is just telling us that. I hope somebody was blessed by this today. And if you are, fantastic. We'll cover chapter 26 very soon. And we'll close in prayer. May the Lord bless us and keep us and make his face to shine on us forever. Amen.